the skies over Cambodia had
Target
never
acquired.
witnessed anything so strange and
Target
violent.
acquired.
A
Launch
massive
sequence
facility,
initiate.
bearing the marks of modernity and nuclear ambition, had just been completed with Chinese assistance, quickly becoming a focal point of global attention. But that moment of joy and pride lasted only briefly. For the instant the plant became operational, thunderous sounds erupted from above, signaling an unprecedented attack. American missiles, combined with state-of-the-art fighter jets, streaked toward the target at breakneck speed, turning the once peaceful scene into a blazing inferno that was almost impossible for witnesses to believe. In mere minutes, the sky lit up so brightly it seemed like daytime, the blinding light reflecting off nearby forests and rivers, creating a spectacle both magnificent and horrifying. The world watched through breaking news reports, a mix of shock and fear rippling through international newsrooms. Everyone wondered, what could have caused a nuclear plant, a symbol of progress and power, to become a target in the blink of an eye? These questions were posed not only to the Cambodian government but to global powers and the international community alike. The reasons behind the U.S. campaign against Cambodia's nuclear plant were neither impulsive decisions nor merely the result of routine geopolitical tensions. Behind this event lay a complex chain of strategic analyses, rooted in deep concerns about the balance of power in Southeast Asia and the potential of an emerging nuclear capability. When Cambodia publicly deployed the nuclear facility with technical and financial support from China, the U.S. immediately recognized it not merely as an energy project, but as a strategic move capable of significantly altering the regional power balance. In the volatile political landscape of Asia, any nation possessing nuclear capabilities becomes either a pawn or a threat in the international geopolitical game. One of the central reasons for the U.S. decision to intervene was the plant's latent military potential. Although Cambodia insisted that the facility was intended for research and peaceful energy purposes, history and international experience have shown that civilian nuclear technology can always be converted into military capability under tense circumstances. The U.S., as a global power monitoring the spread of nuclear technology, is particularly sensitive to such developments. Even if the plant had not yet produced nuclear weapons, the ability to conduct research, stockpile materials, and build related infrastructure was enough for the U.S. to consider it a latent threat, one that needed to be neutralized before it became an inevitable reality. Moreover, China's involvement further heightened the alarm. Beijing's provision of technical assistance, supply of materials, and deployment of experts to oversee Cambodia's nuclear plant raised
Target acquired.
U.S. concerns about
acquired.
China's strategic
Launch sequence
influence in the
initiate.
region. If Cambodia were to become a nuclear launching pad with Chinese backing, not only would the power balance in Southeast Asia shift, but the risk of regional proliferation across the Asia-Pacific would increase. This directly threatened U.S. allies, particularly neighboring countries such as Thailand, Vietnam, and the Philippines, compelling Washington to act decisively. The issue extended beyond security into political symbolism. The U.S. remains vigilant against any signs that a regional nation is achieving independent nuclear power, as it could inspire other countries to follow suit, triggering a dangerous ripple effect in both political and military spheres. Thus, the attack was not solely aimed at destroying the plant, it also served as a deterrent, sending a clear message to other nations that the U.S. is ready to act if nuclear power falls into the hands of countries considered a strategic risk. Finally, the timing of the attack was critical. The moment the plant was completed and operational, its capacity for producing nuclear material or progressing toward military capabilities was still in an early stage. The U.S. recognized this as a golden window for action. Delaying could allow the facility to achieve nuclear self-defense capabilities or produce sensitive materials, making destruction more difficult and strategic risk higher. Therefore, the decision to strike was a calculated combination of long-term strategy, risk prevention, and seizing the opportunity before the situation became more complex. In summary, the U.S. targeting of Cambodia's nuclear plant was not a random act, but the result of a combination of strategic factors: the latent threat of nuclear capability, Chinese involvement, regional political impact, and the urgency of timing. Each factor was carefully weighed, forming a complex picture of power, strategy, and deliberate military decision-making. In the darkness before sunrise, Command centers across multiple locations watched tensely as a series of decisions carefully weighed over weeks came to fruition. It wasn't about technical schematics or flight plans, specific numbers, coordinates, and methods were left unmentioned, but about the broader picture of choice. Would acting now prevent a long-term threat, or would it unleash a chain of unforeseen consequences? The decision was made under a heavy atmosphere of responsibility. Key figures didn't speak about the names of devices or operational procedures. They spoke of the primary objectives: preventing a resource that could shift the balance of power, minimizing civilian casualties, and protecting allies in the region. Rather than detailing maneuvers, discussions revolved around possible outcomes, evacuation plans, and transparent communication strategies to reduce panic. When the campaign began in description, it unfolded like a coordinated symphony. Aircraft slicing through distant skies, surveillance systems observing every movement like vigilant eyes, and support units standing ready to respond to unexpected situations. Yet the emphasis here is on human coordination, emergency meetings, hurried messages, and exchanged glances between commanders rather than technical tricks. There was a clear effort to minimize impact on civilians. Surrounding areas were warned, evacuation routes were opened, and rescue personnel were on standby. The sky erupted in light, a scene both spectacular and terrifying, but the focus of the description is on the human experience. A mother clutching her child under a porch, eyes flashing in the glare. A TV reporter struggling to convey the truth while news remained fragmented. Nations watched through screens and bulletins, reacting in different ways, with outrage, calculated silence, or fear of a new era of competition. In the aftermath, there were no combat algorithms or demolition instructions, only political and humanitarian consequences, displaced populations, communities forced to relocate, and pressing environmental and health concerns. Medical experts and relief organizations emerged as crucial actors, assessing damage, tending to the injured, and mitigating long-term public health impacts. Diplomatic negotiations began immediately, with international bodies calling for independent, transparent investigations. A profound layer of reflection runs through the narrative. Military power may neutralize an immediate threat, but it also raises questions of ethics, international law, and responsibility for innocent lives. The individuals in the story, from politicians to commanders, civilians to journalists, had to confront the consequences of their decisions. Some deemed the action necessary to maintain regional order. Others saw it as a dangerous move, eroding international legal norms. The conclusion of this segment is not a simple victory but a complex turn, a reminder that in the political world, every military action triggers a chain reaction, prompting reflection on value, cost, and future impact. The narrative closes on weary faces after a long day of tension, people forced to live with their decisions, and a larger community bearing the consequences. It is a chronicle of power, responsibility, and the cost of choices that are primarily ethical and political rather than technical, and it is precisely here that the tension of the entire event becomes most haunting. The sky seemed to be redrawn in an instant, not with colored pencils, but with fire and blinding light, compressed and then exploding outward. Streaks of light shot across, leaving behind trails like shimmering silver threads, followed by a series of explosions tearing through the air, creating enormous bursts of brightness suspended in the sky. From afar, where people stood watching, the scene resembled a grand, terrifying light show, mesmerizingly beautiful, yet ripping apart any sense of peace. For a few minutes, which to those witnessing felt endlessly long, the light was so intense that houses, rivers, and tree canopies reflected it like a colossal mirror. Tree shadows imprinted on the water were warped into strange patterns of light and dark. Birds scattered in panicked flight, and sounds echoed and then faded like a giant wave dying away. Shouts, sirens, and fragments of conversation were cut through by the rumbling, leaving an atmosphere of chaos tempered by an eerie silence, a silence of people overwhelmed by a phenomenon too immense to react to. News cameras, cell phones, and amateur drones captured the sky as if it were a surreal painting. Blooming patches of light, fragments of debris swirling, and a drifting cloud of smoke slowly expanding into a dark haze. Rays of red-orange, gold, and silver overlapped, creating the effect of a shattered sun. Those standing further away described the sensation as if the sun were rising in the middle of the night, a vision that stunned both adults and children alike. It wasn't just light. The sounds after the explosions left a lasting impression. The ground trembled, rattling household items, making window panes shiver as if about to break, followed by a chain of smaller explosions echoing like distant thunder. Yet amidst the noise, what lingered most was the faint whisper of nature, water slowing its flow, insects vanishing, and the cautious footsteps of people checking the aftermath. Together, these formed an unusual symphony, chaotic and haunting. Individual images etched themselves into memory in the days that followed. A middle-aged man stood on a rooftop, eyes glued to the streaks in the sky, clutching an old radio as if awaiting an explanation. A young girl bent to pick up scattered shards of glass, hands trembling, eyes still trying to make sense of what had happened. Firefighters, shrouded in smoke, moved swiftly along streets covered in ash, each step an effort to restore order. Faces frightened, curious, terrified, or chillingly composed formed a human tableau against the unexpected backdrop. In the media, the blazing sky quickly became the symbol of the event. Continuous news coverage, bold headlines, and social media flooded with raw footage from the scene. Each clip, each photo offered a different perspective. Some saw destructive power, others tragic beauty in the flames, and still others questioned responsibility and consequences. For the witnesses, however, processing information came second. The initial experience was direct, unfiltered, and overwhelmingly emotional. By dawn, the thin layer of smoke and dust began to settle, leaving fine ash on the ground like pale snow. The smell of molten metal, damp earth, and burnt oil lingered near residential areas, prompting people to cover their mouths and struggle to assess temporary safety or hidden danger. Some riverside trees were charred, leaves scattered, adding to the sense of desolation. The psychological impact of the spectacle couldn't be measured immediately. In nearby neighborhoods, children asked their parents if the heavens had broken. Elders recalled memories of old wars, while local authorities urged calm. Hospitals treated minor injuries from debris, shock, and respiratory issues caused by dust. Community aid groups quickly mobilized, distributing blankets, water, and information to those in need. Through it all, the blazing sky became a fissure not just in the atmosphere, but in collective memory. It marked a moment, one that people would later recount with, "That's when the sky lit up," and continued to describe what they saw, heard, and felt. In the longer narrative of politics, diplomacy, and humanitarian response that followed, those few radiant minutes would remain a reminder. Power can emerge unexpectedly. As the dust began to settle and the small flames dwindled, the sight revealed a scene of devastation surpassing any prior description. The nuclear plant, once showcased as a symbol of progress and ambition, was no longer intact. Concrete frames were twisted, roofs shattered, and metal structures curled like burning silver ribbons. Storage units, pipelines, and auxiliary buildings lay scattered, some completely collapsed, others reduced to rubble. The acrid smell of burning materials mingled with molten metal and an indefinable sharp odor, choking the air and making it impossible for anyone to approach without protection. Fine ash coated the ground, rooftops, and vehicles, covering the area like dirty snow. Streets around the area were plunged into silence, broken intermittently by ambulance sirens and military vehicles. Ports, warehouses, and nearby industrial facilities bore severe damage, shattered glass, cracked walls, and goods either incinerated or scattered. Nearby residential areas experienced direct consequences, damaged homes, upturned yards, cars coated in ash and sand. Some areas were isolated due to collapsed roads, broken bridges, or debris blocking passage. Residents were confused, some evacuating as directed by authorities, others gathering in relatively safe spots, eyes glazed, staring toward the former site of the plant as if unable to believe that a symbol of the future had been obliterated. Casualty reports came in during the first hours. Numerous plant workers and construction personnel were missing or severely injured. Security staff and area protection forces suffered losses. The injured lay along streets, rushed to hospitals by ambulance or, in urgent cases, by civilian vehicles. Local hospitals were overwhelmed while medical supplies were limited. Doctors, nurses, and volunteers worked tirelessly, treating wounds, debris injuries, and severe cases of psychological shock. Panic and grief were etched on every face. Some searched for relatives, families clutched each other in tears, and children held on to their parents, unable to comprehend what had happened. The area surrounding the plant was immediately cordoned off by security forces. Access restrictions were imposed to protect civilians from unseen dangers and to allow specialized teams to assess the damage. Rescue machinery and equipment were staged at blocked entry points, with pathways to the site reserved for medical personnel, aid workers, and survey teams. The quarantine created a centrifugal effect. Inside, chaos and urgent work. Outside, communities waited anxiously, seeking accurate information. News and rumors spread quickly, leaving many distant from the site frustrated and uneasy. Environmental consequences began to emerge, vague but concerning. Lands around the plant were covered in ash and debris. Nearby river water changed color and emitted unusual odors, and many agricultural areas were affected. Residents worried about drinking water and food safety. Local markets were empty on the first day due to safety fears. Fishermen witnessed dead fish drifting ashore, rice fields coated in ash, and anxiety over the upcoming harvest brought daily life to a standstill. Environmental and public health organizations urged testing of soil, water, and air samples, but collecting accurate data amid the initial chaos proved a significant challenge. Local and national authorities responded with urgency. Appeals for international aid were made alongside local self-reliance efforts. Officials issued cautious statements, attempting to balance transparency with public calm, while emergency services concentrated resources to save the injured and search for the missing. Support networks including NGOs, religious groups, and local communities mobilized quickly, distributing relief supplies, water, and temporary shelter. Makeshift camps were established, public halls and schools opened as refugee centers, though rudimentary facilities only partially met needs. Internationally, the incident triggered waves of criticism, concern, and calls for investigation. Embassies urged calm, and many countries expressed worries over regional security and the need for humanitarian impact assessments. Initial information remained vague, but diplomatic pressure grew as international interests were drawn into the fallout. Global organizations offered support for environmental and health safety monitoring and demanded transparency in damage reporting. Over the following days, the financial and social impact became increasingly evident. Local businesses suffered heavy losses, port and logistics operations were disrupted, and tourism declined. Residents faced an uncertain future. Those who lost homes needed long-term shelter. Families without income had to find new livelihoods. Children carried the memory of that fateful day. Communities began organizing meetings, recording needs, and compiling lists of cases requiring assistance. Yet the path to recovery remained long and complex. For many, the most enduring impression was not merely the physical rubble, but the sense of security erased. Questions of responsibility and power transformed the event from a major accident into a political and social wound. As investigators and experts began their work, questions of cause, accountability, and remediation would accompany every step of recovery. Regardless of how much assistance arrived, restoring what was lost livelihoods, trust, and the image of the land would be a far more intricate challenge. The attack and the instantaneous obliteration of a nuclear plant was not merely a local tragedy, it immediately became a diplomatic shockwave, triggering a complex chain of international responses, fraught with tension and unpredictability. In the first hours, international organizations called for restraint and transparency. The United Nations, nuclear oversight agencies, and numerous governments emphasized the need for independent assessments of radiological safety and humanitarian consequences, urging all parties to avoid actions that could further escalate tensions. Calls for diplomatic engagement and technical investigation quickly dominated international forums, reflecting concerns that such a strike could undermine established arms control norms and set a dangerous precedent for the future. Reactions among nations were sharply divided. Some close allies of the actor issued statements supporting self-defense or framed the strike as a preventive measure against strategic risks, while many others, including major powers maintaining neutrality or opposing unilateral intervention, condemned it as a violation of sovereignty and international law. Countries with strategic ties to the attacked state expressed strong outrage, demanding an emergency Security Council session and a thorough examination of the evidence leading to the strike. This polarization rapidly generated high-pressure diplomatic currents, public scrutiny on social media alongside quieter but equally intense bilateral channels. Statements from nuclear and public health oversight bodies carried significant weight. They demanded access to the site to assess the risk of radioactive leakage, soil, water, and air contamination, while warning of long-term health consequences if evaluations were delayed. These appeals were not merely technical, they became central to shaping global public opinion. International media continuously highlighted environmental hazards and the unpredictable risks to civilians, increasing pressure on governments to provide transparent information and facilitate rapid humanitarian aid. From an international law and political perspective, the incident ignited debates in academic and diplomatic circles over the legality of unilateral military action, the criteria for self-defense, and the evidentiary standards required to justify the use of force. Scholars, NGOs, and legislators across multiple countries engaged in vigorous debate. Some argued that, in the context of preventing serious risk, decisive action could be justified. Others warned that repeating such a precedent would undermine the international legal order and encourage new arms races. This debate quickly permeated parliamentary discussions, the media, and official statements, transforming the event from a military issue into a broader discussion about values, legal norms, and collective responsibility. The practical consequences included a series of simultaneous diplomatic and economic measures. Some countries recalled ambassadors, issued formal statements, or suspended cooperative projects. Others called for inspections or even considered sanctions against the actor. Financial and energy markets responded swiftly, prices fluctuated, supply chains were disrupted, and investors reassessed regional risks. Humanitarian aid networks and international organizations mobilized immediately to support victims, while pressing for conditions that would allow international experts to access the site to clarify both technical and humanitarian outcomes. Beneath the official statements lay deep geopolitical calculations. One nation used the incident to strengthen alliances. Another seized the moment to advocate for moderation and dialogue, while regional actors considered adjustments to defense and diplomatic strategies. Ultimately, the international community found itself probing the boundaries, seeking to prevent a broader conflict while struggling to reconcile with the precedent of destroying a critical facility through unilateral military action. The immediate legacy of the event was a map of diplomatic tension, where every subsequent move from UN sessions to bilateral calls could determine whether the region spiraled into further escalation or found a diplomatic way out. But it is also a profound reminder of the value of peace, responsibility, and prudence in strategic decision-making. Every action, no matter how brief in duration, leaves lasting consequences, affecting people, the environment, and the international order. Through this story, we see that military power is never merely a simple calculation of effectiveness. It is inseparably tied to ethics, law, and the survival of communities. Lessons on risk management, the importance of diplomacy, and transparency in information must be remembered to prevent similar disasters in the future. We invite you, our audience, to share your thoughts and reflections. How do you perceive this event? Can military decisions like these ever be justified strategically? Or do they only create further tension and consequences? Comment below to join the discussion, analyze different perspectives, and engage in a meaningful exchange. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for in-depth analyses, the latest articles on international events, and breaking developments. Share this video or article with friends in your community to foster discussion, spread awareness, and emphasize the importance of peace, security, and global responsibility. Every view, comment, and share helps build an informed, engaged community ready to learn from vivid historical lessons, such as this event.